I built this place, Morgan said, her voice now low and level like thunder far in the distance. Alyssa smiled. You know, she said, voice laced with condescension, I don't care what kind of story you've told yourself, but people like you don't usually walk through these doors pretending to be in charge. Morgan blinked once. Slowly. The air seemed to still around her. People like me, she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Alyssa smiled, but it wasn't kind. Come on. No assistant. No reservation. No designer anything. A duffel bag? And that attitude? You're lucky security hasn't asked you to leave already. Morgan said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was weight. Heavier than any words. Stay with us until the end to see how a woman, dismissed for the color of her skin, quietly forced an entire system to reckon with itself. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that challenge assumptions and inspire change, because every voice deserves to be heard. The glass doors at the Belwyn Royale spun quietly as Morgan Ellison, 48 years old and calm as the evening air, stepped inside. She wasn't dressed like a CEO. No designer bag. No entourage. No bodyguards holding umbrellas. Just a canvas duffel slung over her shoulder, loafers so soft they didn't even make a sound against the polished marble floor, and a silk blouse the color of dusty lavender that caught no unnecessary light. She didn't come for spectacle. No welcome drinks. No ceremonial red carpet. Just a key. A bed. And one night to reset before a board meeting she hadn't even planned to attend in person. That was until instinct pulled her here. Until a little voice reminded her, show up when it matters most. The lobby glowed with soft ambient lighting and the hum of quiet conversations. A couple in business casual laughed near the fireplace. A concierge was helping a guest with luggage. Everything felt normal. Except what happened next. Behind the front desk sat a young woman with acrylic nails tapping against a keyboard, her teeth gently biting on the end of a pastel pen. Her name tag read, Alyssa. She looked up just as Morgan approached. Checking in? She asked, voice neutral. Morgan offered a warm but modest smile. Yes. Reservation under Ellison. Morgan. Alyssa's fingers danced over the keyboard, click click pause. Her smile faltered. I'm not seeing anything under that name. That's all right, Morgan replied gently. There should be a suite under the owner's block. Always held open. Alyssa tilted her head slightly. Her tone cooled. I'm sorry, ma'am. We're at full capacity tonight. You'd need to have a confirmed reservation. For guests only. Morgan's smile didn't fade, but the air shifted. Not because of what was said but because she'd heard it before. Behind Alyssa, mounted proudly on the wall, was a brushed gold plaque, the Belwyn Royale, an Ellison Group property. She wasn't just a guest. She was the name on the plaque. I am a guest, Morgan said quietly. And more than that, I own this hotel. Alyssa blinked. It was the kind of blink you give when someone says something impossible, like a stranger claiming to be royalty. A second later, her lips curled into a skeptical smirk. You own the Belwyn? Morgan nodded. Alyssa leaned toward the desk phone. I'm going to call the manager. Go ahead. Alyssa didn't reach for the phone immediately. For a moment, she just looked at Morgan, really looked, and something behind her eyes shifted. Not fear. Not confusion. But something colder. Something bitter. She tilted her head slightly, crossed her arms, and let out a soft scoff. You know, she said, voice laced with condescension, I don't care what kind of story you've told yourself, but people like you don't usually walk through these doors pretending to be in charge. Morgan blinked once. Slowly. The air seemed to still around her. People like me, she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Alyssa smiled, but it wasn't kind. Come on. No assistant. No reservation. No designer anything. A duffel bag? And that attitude? You're lucky security hasn't asked you to leave already. Morgan said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was weight. Heavier than any words. Alyssa leaned forward, her nails clicking on the desk. If you're really the owner, where's your entourage? Where's your driver? You don't look the part. And honestly, you don't sound like someone who belongs in this kind of lobby. Still, Morgan didn't move. Alyssa added, almost as an afterthought, maybe you should try somewhere more fitting. The message was unmistakable. You don't belong here. Not because of your reservation. Not because of your attitude. But because of your skin. It was wrapped in implication, but it didn't need to be said outright. Morgan had heard versions of it her entire life. The tone. The look. The doubt sharpened into insult. But this time, she wouldn't let it pass. I built this place, Morgan said, her voice now low and level like thunder far in the distance. Brick by brick. Floor by floor. I've signed every lease. Approved every blueprint. Every detail you see, I've touched. The eucalyptus in the air. That's mine. The linen stitching in the sheets. Mine. Even your name tag font, I picked it. She leaned in slightly, just enough. And you just told me I don't belong. Because I don't fit your picture of what power looks like. Alyssa faltered. Morgan stepped back, reached for her phone. Let me show you what it actually looks like. Across the lobby, a man with a golf cap paused mid-sip of his cocktail. A woman near the elevator subtly turned her head. You could feel it, the tension. The old, familiar shift in a room where someone gets accused of pretending to be more than they appear. Moments later, a tall, wiry man in a crooked tie and holding a clipboard emerged from a side hallway. His badge read, Travis Bell, Assistant Manager. He approached with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Good evening, he said brightly. Is there an issue with your reservation? She claims to own the hotel, Alyssa said loudly enough for half the lobby to hear. Morgan didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on Travis. I don't claim, she said evenly. I do. My name is Morgan Ellison. You'll find it on every quarterly report and every executive memo. There's always a suite reserved under the Ellison block. Travis shifted, clearly thrown. Just one moment, please. He turned and spoke into his walkie. The words weren't audible, but the tension was. Then security appeared. Not in a rush. Not hands-on. Just, present. One stood near the elevator, another leaned subtly against the wall beside the coffee bar. Morgan felt it, not fear. Something older. Something deeper. That familiar fire starting to rise, low in her chest. The kind that builds not from danger, but from dismissal. She could have pulled out her ID. She could have shown photos of the ribbon cutting from 5 years ago. Pulled up emails, contracts, ownership documents. But she didn't. She stepped back quietly. Pulled out her phone. And made one call. Just one. The call lasted 26 seconds. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to explain. She simply gave her name, her location, and said. I've been denied access to my own property. Please resolve it. Then she waited. No pacing. No loud sighs. No live stream. Just calm, controlled stillness by a marble pillar, with a phone in hand. At the desk, Alyssa kept typing, as if staring hard enough might change the screen's reality. Travis disappeared into the back. The receptionist glanced down and, thinking Morgan wasn't looking, began typing something into her personal phone. Google, probably. Morgan's name. What would she find? For some, it would be shocking. For Morgan, it was always the same. People expected CEOs to look a certain way. Old. White. Male. Wearing tailored suits and Rolexes. Traveling with assistants who checked in for them. Morgan didn't fit that mold. Brown skin. Natural textured hair pulled into a tight puff. No loud jewelry. No brand name handbag. Just presence. And because she didn't match the picture in their heads, they questioned the reality in front of them. That's what always stung the most. Not the denial but how unsurprising it felt. She thought back to Milwaukee. 2 decades ago. 28 years old. Just made VP. Wearing heels that blistered her feet and a suit she bought secondhand. She had walked into a hotel lobby back then, too. And security had followed her the entire time. The only reason she got into her room? The CFO came down and confirmed who she was. Here she was. 20 years later. Still explaining. The elevator dinged. 2 men exited. One wore a charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt. The other, a branded fleece. Both walked with purpose. Morgan knew them instantly. Warren J. Bellamy, Regional Vice President. Jerome Fields, District Manager. The panic in their eyes said everything. Warren reached her first. "Miss Ellison," he said breathlessly. "We're so sorry. I just got the call." Jerome added, "We're taking care of this now." Travis emerged again but was swiftly silenced by a glance from Warren. Carlos turned toward the receptionist. His tone low and sharp. "Suite 1412 has been cleared. We're also rerouting the driver for your morning travel. Fruit tray and espresso will be delivered shortly." Morgan gave a small, polite nod. "Thank you." But she wasn't done. She wanted to watch. To see what happened when the room realized who she was. Would their tone shift? Their posture? Would their customer service suddenly bloom? Because being disrespected when no one knows your name is one thing. Being disrespected when they do, is another entirely. Jerome leaned toward Travis, whispering sharply. Warren pulled out his phone, muttering clipped phrases about HR violations and protocol breaches. The tension that had aimed at Morgan just minutes ago now spread across the staff like wildfire. Fear, embarrassment, and something else, guilt. Morgan didn't gloat. Didn't smirk. She simply walked up to the desk, phone in hand, and said. "I'll take the 14th floor suite. Same setup. Please send someone up to verify cleanliness." Alyssa opened her mouth. No words came. "Have I been checked in?" Morgan asked Warren, turning slightly. "Just finalized," he replied, clipboard in hand. 2 key cards and an incident report will be prepared before you reach the elevator. "And the rest?" "We've issued a site-wide alert," he answered. "A full corporate audit team is on standby. Guest protocol recertification starts tonight." Morgan's eyes briefly flicked to Alyssa. Her fingers still tapped the desk, but now with anxious rhythm. Gone was the careless confidence. "You'll speak to her," Morgan said softly. Warren nodded. "Privately. With HR present." "I'll speak to her too," Morgan added. "Not now. After I've rested." She took the keys, turned toward the elevator. No one stopped her. But everyone watched. The doors of the elevator closed with a soft whisper. Inside, Morgan Ellison stood still, clutching the 2 key cards as the numbers on the digital panel ticked upward toward the 14th floor. Her face was unreadable serene, but not passive. Like a tide gathering under calm waters. When the elevator opened, the suite awaited. It smelled of lemon and something faintly herbal, eucalyptus, perhaps. Clean. Composed. But Morgan didn't walk in like a guest eager to relax. She stepped in like an inspector checking her own blueprints. Her eyes scanned the corners. Bedding tucked. Glassware spotless. Lighting dim but welcoming. On the coffee table sat a fruit tray. A small ceramic plate of dried mango, blackberries, and cut apple arranged in neat concentric circles. Beside it, 3 espresso pods. And next to the machine a handwritten card. It read, in rushed but neat cursive. Miss Ellison, welcome back. Concierge, Belwyn Royale. She picked it up slowly, ran her fingers across the edge. It was polite. It was appropriate. But it was also late. Morgan sat on the edge of the bed. Not to rest. Just to think. Her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfectly upright. Her phone buzzed. Ava, executive assistant. Everything's in motion. Do you want a public statement drafted? Morgan stared at the message. She could have. Easily. One tweet, and this incident would spread like wildfire across corporate Twitter. Black CEO denied access to her own hotel. The headlines would write themselves. Interviews. Panels. Apologies. Hashtags. But she wasn't interested in going viral. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about vengeance. It was about values. There was a knock at the door. Room service, a voice called. Morgan opened it to find a young man, maybe 19. Nervous, respectful. He held a tray with a single espresso and a folded note beside it. He bowed slightly, then stepped back. She thanked him. Took the tray. Closed the door. The note was from the kitchen manager. A handwritten apology. And an offer, complimentary massage services, on the house. She placed the note beside the fruit tray, took a sip of the espresso, then turned toward the window. The city blinked back at her. Charlotte's skyline shimmered in muted blues and golds. Traffic flowed steadily below along Tryon Street. Somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled over metal tracks like a slow, mechanical heartbeat. Life moved on. The world turned. But inside her, something shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't ego. It was resolve. She hadn't built Ellison Group just to prove a point. She had built it because she believed that service wasn't about appearances, it was about presence. About care. About humility and dignity at every level. She remembered being 33. Sitting in a fluorescent-lit bank office in Minneapolis. 3 men across from her, arms folded, eyes narrowed. They gave her loan terms so brutal it was practically a dare, let's see if you can survive. She did more than survive. Now, nearly 20 years later, she was here. Not just in a suite she designed but in a war she'd hoped she no longer had to fight. Her phone buzzed again. A different message this time. Warren Bellamy, executive team will be in the conference room by 6:30 a.m. sharp. HR present. We've scheduled the meeting you requested. Morgan typed one word, confirmed. Then she turned off her phone. Not just the screen. Power down. Complete silence. She needed no distractions. No opinions. No noise. Just rest. And clarity. At 6:28 a.m., Morgan stepped into the lobby again, this time, no duffel bag, no silk blouse. Now, she wore a fitted charcoal gray suit. Ivory blouse beneath. Leather heels that clicked with quiet finality. Her hair was pulled back into a smooth, elegant bun. A gold Ellison pin shimmered just beneath her lapel. The lobby was stirring, early risers grabbing coffee, guests checking out. But when Morgan walked past the front desk, a hush followed her like a moving silence. Even the barista at the kiosk stopped mid-pour. No announcement had been made. No trumpet. But they all knew. She was the reason the entire building was holding its breath. Warren Bellamy and Jerome Field stood by the fireplace, stiff and silent, each holding a leather folder and a cup of untouched coffee. They fell into step beside her as she passed. The small executive conference room sat just past the concierge desk. It wasn't grand, no need. But it was glass-walled. Transparent. Purposefully placed where anyone could see the meeting, but not hear it. Inside, seated at the far end of the table, were the people from last night. Travis Bell, assistant manager. Alyssa Carter, front desk receptionist. Maya Reddick, HR representative from corporate, notepad already open. No one was speaking when Morgan entered. In fact, no one moved. She didn't sit. She placed her folder on the head of the table, folded her arms, and asked calmly, "Would someone like to explain what happened last night?" Silence. Alyssa looked down instantly. Travis shifted uncomfortably. No one answered. Morgan waited. Then she repeated slightly firmer this time, "Your perspective. I want to hear it." Finally, Alyssa spoke. Barely above a whisper. "I just didn't think she was," her voice trailed off. Morgan didn't blink. "Didn't think I was what?" "I didn't expect," Alyssa paused. "I didn't expect you to be the owner." Morgan stepped closer. "Was I rude to you?" Alyssa shook her head. "No, ma'am." "Did I raise my voice?" "No." "Did I threaten anyone?" "No." Her voice was even smaller now. Morgan looked at Maya from HR. "This isn't a firing squad," she said firmly. "But there must be accountability." Maya nodded. "Understood." Jerome stepped in. "We're issuing a formal write-up and removing Alyssa from the front desk rotation until full recertification is completed. Travis will be placed on administrative review pending further interviews." Morgan nodded. She still hadn't sat down. She looked directly at Alyssa. "How long have you worked here?" 4 months. "And in that time, have you ever wondered who built this hotel?" Alyssa hesitated. "I just assumed it was a company. Some investors." Morgan let the silence settle. Then said, 17. "That's how many properties I've built. From Baltimore to Santa Fe. Every one of them designed with purpose. Luxury made accessible. Service made human. I built this brand because I was tired of being treated like a shadow. So tell me why, when I walk into my own lobby, am I still invisible to the people working under my name?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But the weight of her words was undeniable. Alyssa looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. Travis stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Jerome added, "We've already drafted a company-wide memo. Starting today, every Ellison property will undergo mandatory inclusivity training. No exceptions." Morgan turned to him. "Don't let it become another box to check. I don't want memorized scripts. I want awareness." Warren, quiet until now, finally spoke. "We'll make it real." Morgan finally sat. The chair didn't creak. The table didn't move. But everyone in the room felt the gravity shift. Then, she stood again. "This meeting's over." The staff scattered like smoke. But Morgan wasn't finished. She didn't storm out. She didn't wait for applause. She waited, until the noise of the morning faded. Until the lobby was steady again. And then she looked for Alyssa, not as her boss. Not with a clipboard. But as a woman. With a conversation that needed to happen. The staff lounge sat quiet, tucked behind the coffee bar where the scent of burnt espresso lingered faintly in the walls. No music. No chatter. Just the low hum of an old vending machine and the distant murmur of early checkouts echoing from the front desk. Morgan Ellison pushed the door open slowly, stepping into the stillness without a word. At the far corner of the room, hunched over a small table with a half-eaten blueberry muffin and a forgotten cup of coffee, Alyssa Carter looked up. She startled slightly when she saw Morgan, her spine snapping straight, eyes wide. The empty chair across from her squeaked slightly as Morgan pulled it out and sat down. "Relax," Morgan said softly, her voice even and unthreatening, "I just want to talk." Alyssa nodded quickly, fumbling to sit properly, brushing muffin crumbs off her lap with nervous hands. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Morgan tilted her head gently. "Drop the ma'am," she said. "This isn't a hearing." Alyssa bit her lip and nodded again. Her phone lay face down beside her tray, unopened, untouched. Morgan noticed it but didn't comment. The silence that settled between them wasn't awkward, it was necessary. Grounding. Honest. After a moment, Morgan spoke. "Have you ever worked anywhere where you felt small?" Alyssa blinked, caught off guard by the question. She looked at Morgan, unsure how to respond. "Yeah," she said eventually, her voice hoarse, "most of the time, actually." Morgan leaned back, elbows gently resting on the arms of her chair. "Tell me about one of those places." Alyssa exhaled slowly. "I worked at a diner off I-85 for a year. Paper hats, 12-hour shifts. Got yelled at by the cooks constantly. Some customers didn't even look me in the eye. They called me kid even though I was 27. I got used to being invisible." Morgan nodded slowly. "So you know what that feels like?" "Yes," Alyssa said quietly. "Then help me understand," Morgan said, her tone steady but firm, "how you looked me in the eye last night and decided I didn't belong here." Alyssa's throat worked as she tried to speak. But nothing came out at first. Just silence and guilt. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know. I didn't mean to. It just when you walked in, I thought maybe you were lost. Or waiting for someone. You didn't look like," she stopped herself, catching the words before they fell. "Didn't look like what?" Morgan asked, not unkindly. Alyssa shook her head. "Like the kind of person who owns a place like this." Morgan didn't react. She simply asked, "And what does that kind of person look like?" Alyssa didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the answer wasn't about suits or salaries, it was about assumption. About a mental image so deeply etched into culture that anything outside of it felt like a mistake. Morgan looked down for a moment, then back at her. "That's the real issue," she said, "it's not just what you said, it's what you saw. You saw someone who didn't match the picture in your mind. So your brain filled in the rest, this person must be out of place." Alyssa swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. "I know that's not enough. But I am." Morgan nodded slowly. "It's a start. But I'm not here for an apology." Alyssa frowned, confused. Morgan leaned forward. "I came here because I wanted you to see me. Not as your boss. Not as a threat. As a person." She let that sit for a second. "I was you once," Morgan continued. "Started as a receptionist in St. Paul. Got mistaken for a janitor more times than I can count. Called sweetheart and honey like I was some intern. I did everything: night shifts, cleanup, audits. And every time, I had to make a choice: correct them, or let it go." She smiled faintly, not bitterly. "I let a lot of it go. Until one day, I didn't." Alyssa's eyes were wide. "You really started as a receptionist?" Morgan nodded. "And my first manager told me I sounded too educated for phones. Moved me to back office work just so I wouldn't make guests uncomfortable." Alyssa looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "That's unreal," she muttered. "It shouldn't be," Morgan replied. "It should be normal. And that's what I'm trying to build: not just hotels, but space for people to grow. But that only works if the people who join us understand what respect looks like, especially when no one's watching." The vending machine clicked behind them, its compressor kicking in. Alyssa nodded slowly. You don't have to be perfect, Morgan added, but you do have to be aware. Every guest who walks through that lobby, old, young, dressed down, alone, tired, smiling or not, they deserve dignity. Start there, and you won't need to recover from moments like last night ever again. Alyssa stood, unprompted, then caught herself and asked, "Can I say something else?" Morgan raised her eyebrows. "Of course." Alyssa took a breath. "I read about you last night. After everything you've built, all this. The Bellwin Ellison Group. And I sat there thinking, how many people like me don't even know who we work for?" Morgan considered that. "Then make that part of the change," she said. "Learn who built the spaces you enter. And if you can't find them, be the one who asks." Alyssa smiled, small and humbled. "I'll do better." Morgan stood, gathering herself. "Then it was worth it." And with that, she walked out, not triumphantly, not coldly, just intentionally. Because that was the point. Not punishment. Not public shame. Growth. Even if only one person truly changed, that was one more ripple in the pond than there had been before. By mid-morning, the Bellwin Royale had returned to its usual rhythm. Luggage wheels rolled across marble tile. Espresso steamed from the bar. A child pointed at the indoor fountain as his mother adjusted his backpack. Life moved. People smiled. The world resumed. But inside the management office, the air was different. Brent stood near the window, watching as the valet rotated cars under the covered driveway. Jerome typed quietly, drafting the official internal memo Morgan had mandated. And at the center of it all, Morgan sat calm, focused, deliberate. A stack of personnel files in front of her. She wasn't angry. She was exact. "I'm not here to punish," she said aloud, scanning a report. "I'm here to prevent repetition." Jerome looked up. "We're adjusting the front desk hiring process, adding empathy questions, scenario testing, bias evaluations." "Good," Morgan replied. She tapped her pen on the folder. "Put me on the property rotation list. Starting next quarter." Brent turned, confused. "You want to be, what? A mystery shopper?" "Not secret," she clarified, "just anonymous. Until I'm not." Jerome smiled slightly. "That's gonna make some people very nervous." "Good," Morgan said. "Let them sit in it. The real version of this job doesn't come with warning shots." She slid the papers into a new folder. "The new training goes live Friday. I want real stories, not scripted answers. Pull guest letters, staff testimonies, everything raw. Let them see the real moments." Brent nodded. "Done." Morgan exited the office, walking back into the lobby as guests moved around her without realizing who she was. She paused at the front desk, where a new agent was now on shift, different posture, different energy. He smiled at her. Respectful. Not fearful. Not performative. Just human. She returned the nod, then turned to look at the lobby. Everything seemed still. But she felt it. Small cracks forming in old habits. And that's how real change begins, not with a speech, not with a press release, but with quiet corrections, repeated until they stick. She made her way to the elevator, heading back up to collect her things. Her flight wasn't until late afternoon. No rush. When the elevator opened again on the 14th floor, she stepped out. The hallway smelled of fresh linens. Her suite door stood slightly ajar. Housekeeping must have just finished. Everything was neat. Her duffel bag packed. Laptop resting atop the desk. Everything in its place. Except one thing. On the nightstand, a folded note. Not hotel stationery. Just a torn piece of lined paper. Morgan opened it. "Miss Ellison, thank you for your grace. I'll be better. Alyssa." It wasn't fancy. No envelope. No signature line. But it meant more than a PR statement ever could. Morgan folded the note and slipped it into her purse. Downstairs, a black town car was waiting. The same doorman from the night before opened the door with quiet pride. "Safe travels, Miss Ellison. We hope to see you again soon." Morgan offered a small smile. "You will." And as the car pulled away from the curb, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because this time, she wasn't leaving behind disappointment. She was leaving behind a message, whispered at first, but ready to echo. And she knew, it had finally landed. The car moved smoothly through downtown Charlotte, its tires humming a steady rhythm against the pavement, soft and almost meditative. No small talk from the driver. No music on the radio. Just the occasional click of a turn signal and the gentle whisper of wind against the windows. In the back seat, Morgan Ellison sat quietly, one hand resting on the soft leather armrest, the other holding the folded note Alyssa had left for her. She hadn't opened it again. She didn't need to. The words were already etched into her mind not for their eloquence, but for their sincerity. It wasn't an apology carefully written by corporate PR. It wasn't filtered through legal review or designed to check a box. It was just honest. Simple. And it meant more than anyone else in that building probably understood. She looked out the window as the car passed a string of small brick buildings, auto shops, bakeries, a dry cleaner with a faded awning barely hanging onto its frame. Places that reminded her of where she'd come from. Where she'd learned to be invisible. Where she'd mastered how to fold herself into spaces not made for her until she started building her own. This wasn't where she had planned to be this week. She was supposed to be in New York, reviewing a flagship renovation project and preparing for a quarterly board presentation. But life had pulled her somewhere else. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere necessary. Not for business. For truth. For impact. For the conversation. Because the truth was none of this shocked her anymore. What happened at the Belwyn Royale was not new. Not rare. It was a quieter form of rejection, the kind that didn't use slurs or outright threats. Just suspicion. Just doubt. Just a look that asked, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" That was the part that exhausted her. Not the moment itself, but the fact that it kept happening. The frequency. The predictability. The weariness. She didn't carry anger. People misunderstood that. What she carried was memory. Experience layered on experience like bricks in a wall. And the weight of that wall, some days, was heavy. The car slowed as it neared the airport entrance. A line of taxis waited in one lane, families unloading bags in another. A few people rushed across the crosswalk with coffee in hand and earbuds in place, already halfway into their next destination. Morgan sat still as the car pulled up to departures. She didn't move right away. Just sat with the note still in her hand, folded gently in her palm like a small paper promise. Then, with a quiet breath, she reached for the door handle and stepped out. The driver offered to assist with her bag, but she shook her head. "I've got it." She slung the duffel strap over her shoulder, the same one from the night before, worn canvas with a single stitched patch of the Ellison Group emblem, and walked toward the terminal entrance. The automatic doors slid open. Cool air and airport bustle greeted her. People moved like currents, business travelers in suits, tired parents wrangling toddlers, teenagers glued to their phones. No one saw her. Not really. She was just another traveler. And that was fine. Most days, she preferred it. She made her way through security, through the terminal, and toward gate B9 without speaking. Without stopping. When she reached the gate, she didn't sit. She stood off to the side near a tall window, watching as planes taxied in the distance. The sun was just beginning to rise higher, casting amber light across the tarmac. A quiet moment before the noise of the day caught up. And in that stillness, Morgan let herself feel something deeper. The previous night hadn't broken her. It had clarified her. Like walking through fog and realizing it wasn't fog at all, it was smoke. And she'd finally stepped beyond it. She could have made the whole incident public. She still could. One interview. One article. A headline on every business magazine from Forbes to Fast Company. Black woman CEO denied access to her own hotel. But that wasn't the change she wanted. Not headlines. Not sound bites. Not outrage. She wanted growth. She wanted understanding. She wanted awareness. The kind that happens quietly, deeply, and takes root not in news cycles but in people's habits. That's why she didn't raise her voice. That's why she didn't call out names in a press conference. Because true dignity didn't need to be loud. It needed to be consistent. And that's what she was building. One property. One training module. One uncomfortable conversation at a time. A group of flight attendants walked past her. One of them smiled and nodded. Morgan returned the smile. Nothing more. No need for explanation. She wasn't interested in being recognized. She was interested in being understood. A gate agent announced the boarding process through the loudspeaker, calling groups by number. Morgan didn't board immediately. Her group wouldn't be called for a few minutes. She took this moment, this breath between spaces to remember. She thought of her younger self. The woman who once worked night audits and cleaned up after banquets no one invited her to. The woman who once stood in the hallway outside a boardroom she was never supposed to enter. Who once swallowed every insult, every assumption, every inch of disbelief like it was part of the job. She thought of the day she finally sat at the head of the boardroom table and no one could figure out how she got there. But she hadn't arrived by accident. She had earned it. She had claimed it. And she wasn't giving it up. Still standing by the window, she pulled her phone from her coat pocket and opened her notes app. At the top of a blank page, she typed. What does leadership look like when no one sees you coming? Then, below it. How do we train respect into muscle memory? She stared at those words for a long moment, as if willing the answers to rise off the screen. And maybe they would. Not today. Not all at once. But through every small act that followed. Behind her, the boarding gate agent announced her group. She turned slowly, slid her phone back into her coat, and walked toward the gate. No one noticed. No one gasped. And that, too, was the point. She didn't need the world to react. She needed the world to learn. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she thought not of the hotel. Not of Travis or Alyssa. Not even of the suite. She thought of the message she wanted to leave behind. Not in Charlotte. Not just for her company. But for anyone who had ever stood in a room and felt the need to prove they belonged. She wanted to say, you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to know who you are and walk like it. Every single time. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them question it. Let them wonder how they missed it. And when they finally see you, make sure they never forget. The meeting room on the 38th floor of Ellison Group headquarters overlooked the city skyline with panoramic precision. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, the kind that made every executive seated inside feel both powerful and exposed. On one side of the table sat the usual leadership, heads of operations, brand management, legal, HR. On the other quiet but unmistakable sat Morgan Ellison, freshly returned from Charlotte, her presence drawing a line through the center of the room. She hadn't said much yet. She didn't need to. Everyone had already heard. Word traveled fast in companies like this not because of gossip, but because of culture. The kind of culture where one quiet event at a regional property rippled upward until it reshaped entire policies. That morning, the Belwyn Royale story had reached them not as a scandal but as a signal. A signal that something was broken. That assumption still sat at the front desk. That unconscious bias still knew the floor plan better than the guests did. But more importantly, it signaled that Morgan had seen it with her own eyes. And once she saw something, it changed. She didn't open the meeting with outrage. She opened it with a question. "What's the cost," she asked calmly, "of being misrecognized in a space you created?" Silence. The kind that hangs heavier in executive rooms because no one wants to be the first to answer, and no one wants to be wrong. She looked directly at the head of brand strategy. "Not the PR cost. Not the revenue risk. I mean the human cost. The erosion of value. What happens when people don't see the builders behind the buildings?" The head of HR cleared her throat. "We're currently reviewing all onboarding modules. We've already flagged 32 sections for revision. We're also adding required DEI sessions to quarterly training." Morgan nodded once. "Good start. But I want more than training. I want accountability that lives at eye level." She turned to the director of guest experience. "What did the guest surveys say last quarter?" He flipped open his binder, already knowing the page. Guest satisfaction held steady at 87% across all locations. But, he hesitated, when disaggregated by demographics, guests of color, particularly women, reported statistically lower feelings of welcome and recognition. Morgan leaned back slightly. "So we've known." A beat. No one argued. She looked around the room, voice low. "If a guest feels invisible, and your data confirms it, and no one here changes the approach, what does that make us?" A long pause. "It makes us complicit," someone finally said. Morgan nodded. "Exactly." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a single printed photo. It was from the hotel lobby security footage. Grainy but clear, a woman standing silently by a marble pillar, her phone to her ear, security guards in frame, and the front desk ignoring her. She passed it down the table. No commentary. Just a quiet offering. "This isn't about one hotel," she said, as the image moved from hand to hand. "It's about a mirror. And what we choose to do when we don't like what we see." There was a moment of stillness, then the COO, Warren Bellamy, spoke. "We've updated the guest protocol flowchart to include escalation protections for on-site owners and executives traveling anonymously. But we're also recommending a full audit of frontline training, hiring, evaluation, behavior metrics." Morgan nodded slowly, then said, "And I want to be part of it." Heads turned. "You're already leading the company," someone murmured. She shook her head. "That's not what I mean. I want to go into properties. Unannounced. No entourage. No title. Like an undercover boss," the legal director asked. "No," she said, with quiet clarity. "Like a guest. A woman. A stranger in a room. I want to feel what they feel. I want to see what they see." A few executives shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. "Leadership," she continued, "isn't just about vision. It's about presence. And right now, I need to be present in the cracks." The room was quiet. Respectfully so. Morgan gathered her notes and stood. "Next week, I'm visiting our Denver location. Then Houston. Then back to DC. I won't announce myself. And I don't want red carpet treatment once I'm recognized. I want to measure muscle memory. Because if respect isn't automatic, it's not real." The meeting ended with nods, scribbled to-dos, and an unmistakable sense of urgency. But for Morgan, it wasn't about urgency. It was about depth. Later that evening, in her home office, the light of her desk lamp glowed warm against the oak bookshelves lining the walls. Her inbox was full. Dozens of reports. Travel logs. Interview transcripts. Proposals for new signage and revised scripts for front desk staff. All well-meaning. All necessary. But none of it felt as vital as the small piece of lined paper sitting at the edge of her desk. Miss Ellison, thank you for your grace. I'll be better. Alyssa. She hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't even filed it. It just stayed there. A reminder. Not of the insult but of the impact. Of the moment when something landed. When a person who never imagined her boss could look like that had to rethink what power really looked like. That's what she wanted more of. Not just diversity. But reconsideration. Rethinking. Reimagining what leadership could feel like in the room. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jerome in HR, attached are 4 real guest stories to use in the empathy training. All verified. Let me know which ones we highlight. She opened them. Scanned the pages. One was from a young trans guest in Atlanta who said they'd been misgendered 3 times before reaching their room. Another from an older black couple in New Orleans who'd been offered valet instructions 3 times before anyone greeted them with a smile. A third from a single mom in Detroit who had to ask 3 different staff members before someone helped her carry luggage. Morgan read each slowly. She wasn't shocked by any of them. But she felt each one like a thread pulling tighter. This was the work. Not building hotels. But building awareness into their walls. She replied with one line, use all of them. Real stories are the only ones that teach. Then she closed her laptop. Took a breath. And walked into her kitchen. The night outside her windows was quiet. Inside, it felt just a little lighter. Because change was beginning. Not from power. Not from policy. But from one small moment of presence that no one had planned and everyone would remember. A month later, no announcement was made when the woman in the navy coat and soft leather heels walked into the Ellison Grand in Denver. No banners. No cameras. No clipboard-wielding staff rushing to meet her. She stood at the threshold of the lobby like any traveler would, tired, quiet, assessing. Her duffel bag rested on her shoulder. Her hair was tucked neatly beneath a charcoal gray wool scarf. And still, no one recognized her. Not yet. The front desk agent, a young man with sharp posture and a steady voice, looked up as she approached. Welcome to the Ellison Grand, he said with a genuine smile. How can I help you today? She didn't test him. She didn't use her name. Checking in, she replied simply. Reservation under Alexandria Green. A name that only a handful of people at headquarters knew she used when traveling incognito. He nodded, tapping at his keyboard. Let me pull that up for you, Miss Green. Yes, I've got you in a deluxe suite on the 17th floor. Would you like 1 key card or 2? 1 is fine. As he programmed the card, he asked, is there anything we can make your stay more comfortable? Extra pillows? Late checkout? Morgan offered a polite, muted smile. I'll let you know. The transaction took exactly 1 minute and 43 seconds. No suspicion. No double takes. No silent calls to a back office. She took the key and walked toward the elevators without a glance backward. Inside the suite, she exhaled for the first time. Everything was exactly as it should be. Crisp sheets. Eucalyptus scent. A welcome card signed by the assistant manager herself. Fruit tray. Espresso pods. She sat on the edge of the bed not to rest, but to remember. Denver was the first of 6 locations she would visit that quarter. Quietly. Anonymously. Not to catch people failing. But to see how often they rose. The next morning, Morgan didn't schedule a debrief with management. She left a short, handwritten note at the front desk. Thank you for honoring the mission, even when no one was watching. M.E. No signature. No title. Just initials. And then she moved on. The changes weren't flashy. They never are. But across every Ellison property, something had begun to shift. Staff began treating every guest like they might be the CEO because maybe they were. Guest experiences were no longer measured just by survey scores, but by the stories guests left behind. And more than once, front desk agents were pulled into side meetings not for punishment, but for praise. At headquarters, the empathy module went live. It wasn't built from hypotheticals. It was composed of real experiences. Real mistakes. Real growth. Staff were trained not to memorize scripts, but to listen. To pause before making assumptions. To ask, instead of decide. And the idea that respect should only be given after recognition began to erode. One day, a guest in Baltimore, a woman in a maintenance uniform with oil-stained fingers, checked into the Ellison Harbor Inn. The clerk smiled without flinching, handed her the key, and said, "Welcome. Let us know if you need anything." She blinked, as if waiting for a comment. There wasn't one. She said, "Thank you," softly, and walked away. In Phoenix, a nonverbal guest typed a request on his tablet asking for extra quiet accommodations. The front desk didn't just oblige, they wrote him a note in return, handed it over with the key, and signed it, "We see you. We hear you. Thank you for being here." In Atlanta, a 14-year-old guest traveling alone asked where the CEO office was. When staff asked why, the boy said, "Because one day I want to own a hotel too." The concierge didn't laugh. He walked the boy to the framed portrait in the lobby, the one of a younger Morgan Ellison breaking ground on her first property. And he said, "She started just like you." The moments added up. Not in headlines. But in habits. Morgan didn't need to walk through every lobby anymore. Because something better was happening. The staff were walking differently. Standing differently. Seeing differently. But most importantly, they had started asking questions. Who built this place? What does leadership look like? Who might I be ignoring because I'm not paying attention? Those were the real audits. In the third quarter board meeting, someone asked Morgan what she thought had made the biggest difference in the culture shift. She answered without notes, without preparation, without blinking. Real change doesn't begin in a strategy session. It begins at the front desk. Then she closed her binder and said nothing more. Because enough had been said. She had made her point not by force. Not with fear. But with presence. She never needed to yell. She just walked in and made the room see itself. That was the legacy. Not the buildings. Not the logos. But the understanding. That dignity doesn't arrive after recognition. It arrives with you. And if they can't see it, make them look again. In the end, Morgan Ellison didn't raise her voice, demand the spotlight, or seek revenge. She chose something harder. She chose to hold her ground with dignity and turn a moment of humiliation into a lesson in humanity. Her story reminds us that respect should never be conditional, and true leadership doesn't wear a label or need a title to be seen. It lives in action, in awareness, in how we treat people when we think no one's watching. Because the real power isn't in being recognized, it's in knowing who you are, even when the world refuses to. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that challenge assumptions and inspire change, because every voice deserves to be heard.